The inflation we've all been feeling, it wasn't a simple thing. It was this complex beast, really. A story driven by two powerful forces that, as we'll see, eventually combined into a perfect storm.
All right, let's get right to it. I mean, it's the question that's been on everyone's mind for the last few years, right? Why did everything, groceries, gas, cars, you name it, get so expensive, so incredibly fast? Well, to really get a handle on that, we've got to unpack the two big waves that crashed into our economy. Okay, so the first hit, the one that really kicked this whole thing off, it came from the supply side. This was the initial jolt to the system, the thing that first started nudging those prices higher. Now, there's a term for this. Economists call it cost push inflation. But really, the idea is super simple. All it means is that it suddenly becomes way more expensive to make stuff and to ship stuff. And when that happens, well, companies have no choice. They have to raise their prices just to keep the lights on, even if demand for their product is totally normal. And boy, did that happen during the pandemic. We basically witnessed one of the biggest supply shocks in modern history. The entire global economic engine just seized up. Think about it. Factories went dark, ports were totally clogged, and that super efficient just-in-time system, the one where companies keep almost no extra inventory to save money, it completely shattered. A single hiccup somewhere could bring an entire production line to a grinding halt. A perfect example of this? Just look at car manufacturing. The world basically ran out of microchips. No chips, no cars. It's that simple. So what happened? Car production absolutely plummeted. Now, it wasn't because more people suddenly wanted cars. It was because the supply of cars just vanished. And with fewer cars on the lot, the price of the ones you could find, they shot through the roof. That, right there, is cost-push inflation in a nutshell. And it wasn't just finished goods. On top of all that, we got hit with huge shocks to the raw materials that build our economy. Oil is a great example. Producers cut way back when demand first dropped, but then demand came roaring back, way faster than they could turn the taps back on. The price of lumber went insane, metals, food, you name it. And here's the kicker. When energy gets more expensive, everything gets more expensive. It costs more to make things, it costs more to ship things, period. So the final piece of this whole supply side puzzle, a shortage of people. You had folks out sick, early retirements, massive childcare challenges. It all meant fewer workers were available. So to get the people they needed, companies had to start offering higher and higher wages. And guess who ends up paying for that? Yep, that cost gets passed right on to us, the consumers, as higher prices. Okay, so that was the first devastating hit. The supply side of the economy was basically on its knees. But just as that was happening, a second, maybe even more powerful wave was building on the horizon. And this one was a massive, unprecedented surge in demand. And this brings us to the other side of that inflation coin we talked about, demand pull inflation. If you've ever heard the phrase, too many dollars chasing too few goods, well, this is it. The problem isn't that stuff is more expensive to make. The problem is that suddenly everyone has more money in their pocket and they all want to buy things at the exact same time. So you might be asking, where did all this extra money come from? Well, governments all over the world pumped trillions of dollars directly into the economy. We're talking stimulus checks, expanded unemployment benefits, business loans like the PPP. The result was that households ended up with these huge piles of savings and a ton of pent-up demand, just waiting to be unleashed. And at the very same time, central banks threw gasoline on the fire by making it incredibly cheap to borrow money. They slashed interest rates down to almost zero, which encouraged everyone, people and businesses, to spend. This also sent asset prices like stocks and houses soaring, and this created something called the wealth effect. Basically, if your house is suddenly worth a lot more, you feel richer, even if it's just on paper. And when you feel richer, you're a lot more likely to go out and spend. So let's just pause here for a sec and put it all together. On one side, you've got that cost-push inflation. That's the it's too expensive to make stuff problem. And on the other side, you've got demand-pull inflation. That's the too many dollars chasing too few goods problem. Two totally different forces at play. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. The key moment, really the climax of this whole story, is when these two forces collided. Just picture it. You have this absolute tidal wave of cash and pent-up demand, and it comes crashing head-on into a global supply system that is still completely and utterly broken. And this collision point is where things got really, really sticky. Because the two forces,
They stopped being two separate things. They started feeding off each other, creating this vicious feedback loop that made inflation so much harder to get under control.
This is where you hear about something called a wage price spiral, and it works exactly like it sounds. Step 1, prices go up for all the reasons we've talked about. Step 2, workers see this and, naturally, demand higher wages just to keep up. Step 3, businesses agree, but now their costs are higher, so they have to raise their prices, again, to cover those new wages. And boom, the cycle just keeps going.
And this is how high inflation can get embedded in the economy. It's really about psychology. We all started expecting prices to keep going up, right? And that changed how we acted. You'd buy something today because you were worried it would be even more expensive next month. Meanwhile, a lot of central banks were a bit slow on the uptake, initially thinking this was all just transitory. And that delay, well, it just gave that feedback loop more and more time to really take hold.
So when you put all of this together, it really begs the question, right? Why was this time so different? Why was this inflation so much more stubborn than other periods we've gone through?
It really truly was a perfect storm. See, most of the time, inflation is driven by one of these things or the other. But this time, we got slammed by massive cost push and demand pull forces simultaneously. And the shocks weren't just in one little corner of the economy. No way. They hit goods, services, labor, and energy all at once and all across the globe.
And this quote really nails it. It gets right to the heart of the matter. The inflation we saw began with those cost-push problems, the broken supply chains. But it blew up into a full-blown crisis when all that stimulus money caused demand to surge way faster than our busted supply system could ever hope to recover.
So understanding this whole dual driver story is absolutely key to making sense of the economic roller coaster we've been on. But it also leaves us with a huge question for the future, doesn't it? We've seen exactly how this perfect storm came together. So now that those drivers are shifting once again, what's next for inflation?